Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. My name is Emily Leiker. I'm joined by Ben Gessling and Andrew Kramer, all of us of the Minnesota Star Tribune. And today was the first day of the legal tampering period of free agency, and I, working the afternoon shift, was really given a nice warm welcome to the chaos of free agency. There's about 5 Vikings departures, 4 or 5 that all came around the same 10-minute span in that 1:30 time range. And the big one, obviously, was quarterback Sam Darnold's departure to Seattle on a 3-year, $100 million and change contract. And so after months of us spending most, if not all, of these podcasts talking about Darnold and what was going to happen with him and where he was going to go and if he was going to stay, like, let's do it one final time. Give Darnold the Access Vikings send-off he deserves. And Ben, I'll start with you, I guess, just initial reaction to this move and the fit there. Obviously, the rumors that Seattle was interested in Sam came up on Friday after they had traded Geno Smith to the Raiders. And so we had kind of maybe seen this coming for a couple days, but that went official this afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense. And Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator there, had worked with Sam in San Francisco. And San Francisco, from what we heard, was not terribly happy to lose Sam because they felt like he was on the verge of taking another step forward. They wanted him around as another option behind Brock Purdy. So there was already sort of a familiar fit and a place where he would be, kind of have an easier transition, I guess. But yeah, for it to come together, it was interesting to see the numbers. I guess it's about, the Baker Mayfield deal had been talked about a lot, and it's pretty close to that, I think. So, whether his market was affected by those last 2 games, I think is something of a question. I have to think it was, and I have to think, a lot of the skepticism we heard at the Combine about, can he do this apart from Kevin O'Connell, apart from Justin Jefferson, apart from all of the weapons and all of the advantages he has in Minnesota? I have to think probably played into his market a little bit. It did not seem like the Vikings were going to go to that level with him, but he did not get, kind of the top dollar type contract that, you certainly see. Josh Allen, he's not going to get that kind of deal, but even to kind of eclipse that $40 million range, he didn't get that. He didn't get what Kirk Cousins got last year. So interesting to conjecture a little bit about how much those last 2 games played into it, or how much the question about Sam Darnold played into this decision at all. But yes, the Seahawks seemed like the logical fit. And on day 1 of the tampering period, it appears to be signed, sealed, delivered for Sam Darnold in Seattle.
Andrew, obviously the Vikings and the Seahawks have played quite a bit of football against each other in the time that you and Ben have been covering the team and the time that I was mostly just watching and then have been here. But I guess, what do you think about that fit, maybe more schematically and that side of things and just in general?
Yeah, it was interesting to see that he gets to go to Seattle right when they let go of DK Metcalf and tell him, hey, we don't have offensive linemen and now we have fewer receivers as well for you. It was interesting. And obviously that was the connection people made, was Seattle as soon as they deal Geno Smith to the Raiders. And the reporting around the Raiders, the Titans, the Giants, is that these teams just were not enamored with this quarterback free agent class, or the draft class for that matter. So that leads to the domino effect of the Raiders going to acquire Geno and then the Seahawks turning to Sam. And it's important to note that Sam played one of his better games in Seattle this past year. He won the game at the end of the game with a touchdown toss to Justin Jefferson after he was just folded in half the play before. And it looks like you're thinking, is this guy hurt? Is he going to have to get pulled from the game? And Kevin O'Connell dials up a 7-step drop back pass on the next one, and he dodges pressure and throws that touchdown to Jefferson. I'm sure he won some people over in that game. And we know from Vikings regimes of the past, when guys ball out against their team, those memories stick with them. And I wouldn't be shocked if John Schneider and the Seahawks referenced that game that Sam had in December, and a very meaningful game for them late in the year. So that was huge for them. And Ben brings up the numbers. Ben, I thought it was interesting that he got just the Baker Mayfield deal, because 17 other quarterbacks made more money per year last year than that. And arguably, Sam played better than the top half, or was at least in the top half of the league in terms of his performance. So what did you make of just kind of how he's now slotted as like the 18th highest paid quarterback when you got guys like Kirk, guys like Dak Prescott, guys who haven't shown a whole lot. It seemed to me like it was a pretty suppressed deal for him.
Yeah, I mean, he gets the Baker Mayfield deal, but in a market where that's, like you said, not as good of a deal. I mean, getting the Baker Mayfield deal 2 years later, right?
Yeah.
Not as good. I mean, it's just not as good of a contract as what Baker Mayfield got. So, in a league where the cap keeps going up and the prices keep going up, you want your contract to keep going up as well, as a lot of quarterbacks have seen it done. So he must not have felt like his market was going to be that strong outside of that. If you're going to sign that deal an hour and a half into the legal tampering period, rather than playing it out at all and or taking visits or anything like that, he must have seen, this is my best opportunity. Let's take it and go. Because and we heard some of that question, like we said, about how strong was his market really going to be. I think it's part of the reason the Vikings did not put the franchise tag on him, because I think they felt like they had reservations about doing it anyway. But was that number going to be tradable, or could you work something out where you sign him to a contract that everybody's happy with and then you trade that contract? They didn't do it, obviously, because I think there was some question about whether that market was going to be there. And I think that question is still fair, because yeah, it's a pretty middling deal in a lot of ways. And it reflects the fact that there's probably still some questions about Sam Darnold, even though the year he had was awfully impressive until those last 2 games.
Well, and especially him projected to be kind of the top of this quarterback free agent class. Yeah. And then that to be though he comes out with is certainly interesting. 6 p.m. today, which is when we're recording this, Monday. The other, I think, quarterback moves across the country. Jump in if I forget one. But Justin Fields goes from the Steelers to the Jets. Kenny Pickett gets traded to the Browns from being a backup for the Eagles. And then obviously Geno Smith was traded the other day to the Raiders. So that still leaves openings with the Steelers, the Titans, the Giants, the Colts. And as we'll get to in a minute, there's obviously still room for the Vikings to re-sign Daniel Jones or bring someone else in. But now that Darnold's off the market, the next two are Aaron Rodgers and Russell Wilson at kind of the top of that market, which is insane to think about. So Andrew, I guess like looking at those teams that are still looking for quarterbacks and those two guys, I think where do you think things are going to go?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what these other teams do. The Titans don't have really anybody at this point at the position other than Will Levis. They talked at the Combine about bringing somebody in to compete with Will Levis. You look at the Steelers, who, they might just settle for bringing back Russell Wilson. Who knows? And then I think it's interesting with Daniel Jones, because the Vikings pivot is going to be to bring in and aim for Daniel Jones. They've talked openly about wanting to bring him back, bringing him in here in November as an audition, not just for him to audition for them, but for them to audition for him. So when they got to this point, they could tell him about things that he's already seen and not make promises that he'd have to go in there and figure out. So Daniel Jones becomes somehow a guy who was cut in November, flamed out of a $40 million deal after beating the Vikings in the playoffs, somehow becomes a coveted member of this class, because there just aren't a lot of options. It's Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders at the top of the draft, and you've got teams not talking glowingly about those options in the draft. So it's going to be fascinating to see if the Vikings keep Daniel, how much it's going to cost them for a guy who, frankly, like Ben, do you think he's going to get more than what Darnold got last year, which was 1 year, $10 million? Because if I had to bet right now, I'd bet yes.
I would take that same bet. I mean, I think that's probably where it goes, because there just isn't a great market. There wasn't a great market last year either when Kirk Cousins was at the top of it. But yeah, I do think he probably gets more than that. And you just see prices going up for a lot of places in the NFL. And I just think it's probably likely that he will do a little bit better than that, which then leads to the question of what do the Vikings want to do? They're not dealing with the $28.5 million dead money albatross that Kirk Cousins brought last year. That's gone. So they could afford to pay Daniel Jones, say it's $15 million or something like that. I mean, they could do it, but do they want to, or are they saying we're going to go ahead with JJ McCarthy, and kind of burn the boats? I think they want to still have options. I think they've talked about just the general. I mean, Kwesi talked about that at the Combine in terms of we want options at the position. We want optionality, I think is the way he put it. So I would think that they are planning to do that. But what's the price point on that is probably part of the question yet.
Right. And it's worth noting Darnold was not the only Vikings QB to leave today. Backup Nick Mullins also left. He is headed to Jacksonville, where he'll obviously be reunited with Grant Udinski, who's now the offensive coordinator down there under Liam Cohen. That's a 2-year. And Johnny Munt. That's a 2-year deal for Mullins. So now the Vikings quarterback room is really, you have JJ in there, who I think right now we would all project is the starter based on who is still rostered. Brett Rippon as a backup who was moved to the practice squad for that final playoff game. And then we're waiting to see what happens with Daniel Jones. So that will come. We won't do too much more speculating or talk about that, but that's kind of where we stand in the QB room. Everyone wave goodbye to Darnold. We're done talking about Darnold on the Access Vikings podcast. Probably not. He'll come back up.
Not
you guys
entirely,
still talk about
because the
Kirk
Vikings once again go to Seattle next year,
true.
as they seem to do just about every year. So there will be a Sam Darnold revenge game angle. Shout out Chris Thomason for us to cover sometime this season, probably in December, probably a night game. It seems like it always is.
It'll probably be raining.
Oh, of course it'll be raining. I was told I wasn't allowed to make that joke, though.
Yeah, that's why I made it. That's
okay. You're just going for the preemptive admission that it's always raining, which means the joke is valid, even if we can't make it by your press box rules at what are we calling it now? Lumen Field? So
Lumen Field. I still call it CenturyLink.
It's something. My internet bill. It's from whatever that company's called.
So non-QB moves. We're going to start back yesterday evening. Everything's running together in my head now. But yesterday evening, the Vikings re-sign Aaron Jones for 2 years, up to $20 million. I wasn't surprised by this move. This was my pick in our little play the GM game. I think having someone back in that backfield who is a veteran, who understands this scheme, can kind of hold things together when there's potentially basically a rookie quarterback and going to be new interior offensive linemen and things going on. I think this made sense. But Ben, what was your reaction to the Jones re-signing and the deal, the money he got there?
Yeah, I mean, the money to me is kind of interesting because it does seem like we're swinging back a little bit on the running back market. The fact that he got a 2-year deal at 30 when he did not get one at 29 and the average annual value is higher. And even the guaranteed money, I thought, I mean, effectively they can get out of it after this year without a terribly large penalty to it. But if he makes it into 2026, he still has a chance to make a fairly decent payday as part of that. It may end up with a restructure in there somewhere as well if he's going to stay in Minnesota. But yeah, I think the fact that he got what he got probably reflects the year that he had, and just that running back market is coming back a little bit. So yeah, I thought it was something that, I mean, we've all kind of talked about it, and you had it as your pick, Emily, that they wanted to do it. I think they still add at the position. I think they'll probably get another young running back to go with him, possibly in the draft. But yeah, it makes a lot of sense to have him. He's kind of been that guy that's a quarterback's best friend, and it makes sense to have as many of those types of people around, presumably JJ McCarthy, as you can get.
One of Aaron Rodgers' favorites too. I'll just leave that. I'll leave that there.
Don't. Why? Why are you doing this?
We were going to go through the whole podcast with not a mention of Aaron Rodgers.
No, but Emily, to your point, like, yes, I thought this was a smart move for the Vikings. Aaron, it was a deal that paid him a decent amount. His $10 million a year is, I believe, 6th among running backs. He was 7th last year at the position in yards from scrimmage. You don't usually see a guy get paid above his ranking at the position very much when he's 30 years old, but it speaks to where Aaron's at in terms of the Vikings loving him loving the team. It can be a 1-year, $12 million cash deal, but I imagine they're going to want to keep him for that second year to get to the 20 million. And that's the kind of vision they've got. And they've are looking at what Kwesi called a really, really good draft class at running back. So to Ben's point about them adding, I imagine it's going to be a 3rd rounder, a 5th rounder in this draft class to come in and complement him in a way that, frankly, Ty Chandler could not. Cam Akers did eventually by the end of the year. But at this point, coming off 2 Achilles tears, I don't think they're going to put a bunch of stock in him being ready to hold up for an entire season. So even if Cam Akers comes back, and he's a free agent, so he might not, it makes a ton of sense to pull from a young, talented draft class. So they're all young, but a very talented, deep draft class that you could find a contributor in rounds 3, 4, or 5. And also what sticks out to me, and this goes to our next point probably about their offensive line changes, but what sticks out to me is that the rhetoric from the Vikings is not so much this offseason, Aaron Jones, come save us, because that's what it was last year. It was it was rough with Alexander Mattison. We need a good back in here to change this. And Aaron did change a lot. He brought a different dynamic. He corrected a lot of the bad blocking, but they kind of saw that, you can only correct and overcome so much at that position. I think Kwesi said at the combine, if you've got the front to block for them, these guys can really change games. And so I think that dovetails with all the additions that they're trying to make on offense.
Right. And Andrew, you just teased it, so I'll toss it right back to you. The last move that we saw before we got on to record was that the Vikings are going to bring in former Colts center Ryan Kelly to presumably take over the center position from Garrett Bradbury, who does still have another year technically left on his contract. We were talking quite a bit about that right before we started recording. But Andrew, what do you think that indicates with Bradbury and kind of just what's the outlook at center, but then that interior offensive line as a whole with this move?
Yeah, I'll be interested to get Ben's thoughts on this, because the salary cap ramifications are you can move on from Garrett and it'll save you money. And I just wonder why they haven't done that already if this was the plan. I almost wonder if this was a contingency plan of theirs to add Ryan Kelly when some of these guards like Aaron Banks from San Francisco was going for $20 million plus. Trey Smith became the highest paid guard when he signed a $23 million franchise tag. And suddenly all these guards are coming in right at that level of money. It's an insane market. So Ben, how much do you think the market is hampering what they want to do? How much do you think that is in this ecosystem? It is kind of led to where they're at. Because in my opinion, we've talked to Garrett for years, obviously, and even going into this offseason, he wants to be here. And you'd think that if he was in their long-term plans, or excuse me, if he wasn't in their long-term plans, you think they would have moved on from him by now.
Yeah, it is an interesting move in the sense of Garrett Bradbury plays the same position, he's not a guy you would move to guard at this point in his career. He's not big enough, and he just hasn't done it. I guess he did. I should rephrase. He did do it briefly in what year was that Mason Cole ended up as the starter? Was it 21 that he got COVID and then Mason Cole came in as the starter? Like, didn't they move Bradbury to guard for a few weeks?
Zimmer benched Garrett.
Oh, what am I remembering? Who got moved to guard?
But Mason Cole started for Garrett, and Garrett was just flat out benched Zimmer's last year.
He came back in at guard. I'm remembering that wrong, but yes, he did lose the job. It's. In any case, I wouldn't expect him to be a guard at this point. I just don't think that makes a ton of sense. So, the question of why haven't they, and maybe they will in fairly short order, move on from him. They'd save like 3.6 on the cap if they did cut him. They'd have a couple $1 million of dead money, but I think overall the net benefit, the net savings of that would be there for them. For a guy that has been well liked, a guy that has been well respected in that locker room, it is a little bit of I'm sure it's got to feel like a little bit of a kick in the teeth. And I wonder with Ryan Kelly if Will Fries is, I think, somebody they're interested in. So could you pair the two of them together? We'll see. But Ryan Kelly's been to 4 Pro Bowls. He's never played a snap anywhere other than center. So you're not bringing him in with the idea of moving him. So you're probably saying he's our center, and he's the veteran to go with JJ McCarthy, probably. So, that I would think means the end for Garrett Bradbury is a very strong possibility.
And maybe they try to trade him, maybe. If it is a reasonable deal. Like, it's like $4.9 million base salary for Garrett. It's for what offensive linemen are going for. It is a relative bargain. So maybe the move is to try and trade him, and if they can't, they'll release him. But having a $5 million backup center doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
No, I don't think so either. The other one that I'm wondering when we'll see it is Ed Ingram, if they're going to cut him. But with Bradbury at this point, if you were to trade him, the portion of the signing bonus would stay with the Vikings. So it is it's a contract that would make some sense to trade. It would be a palatable contract if somebody likes him and thinks that he can be a fit. I mean, heck, the Seahawks need help on the offensive line. Clint Kubiak has coached Garrett Bradbury before. Yeah, Andrew Janoko has been with Garrett Bradbury. Sam Darnold has been with Garrett Bradbury, obviously. So that would maybe make some sense if you could recoup a draft pick. I think there would be every effort to try to, if you could say get a 6th round pick for him or something like that. I think you'd try. It would make a lot of sense to at least look at that possibility before moving on from him completely.
And I mean, not to get sidetracked, but the Seahawks are like scheming things out west. Like they've been doing all sorts of moves. Yeah. We mentioned the DK Metcalf trade. We mentioned obviously Darnold. So who knows what they might be in for and be willing to take on or trade or let go of. That's the offensive side of the ball. We did have some things happen on the defensive side today. Let's start with the Cam Bynum move. Bynum will be leaving. He's going to Indy for 4 years, $60 million contract. I think we all kind of saw this coming to a degree. There was some speculation like, okay, they are probably going to talk to him and try and get him back. But, I had heard as recently as Friday that those talks were maybe slowing down a little bit. So not a total surprise that this came out today. They had also re-signed or extended Theo Jackson last Thursday, I believe it was, on a 3-year deal. So Ben, what's there to say about Bynum's kind of time here and what this move on from him kind of indicates about the safety room and their obviously faith in Jackson to maybe take over?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Cam Bynum will be a player that fans will miss. I mean, a guy that was very well liked in Minnesota for obvious reasons, very approachable. The dances will, I mean, that's what he'll be remembered for as much as anything. But, made a lot of plays really for a day 3 draft pick, played a lot of snaps, made a lot of plays on the ball, and, had moments where he got beat in coverage, had moments where he got beat trying to make an open field tackle, which I think ultimately is part of the reason the Vikings decided let's not extend him and kind of bank on him being the guy in the future. But I mean, an awfully nice contract for a guy that was a 4th round pick to go get 4 years and $60 million at a position that's not typically the most expensive in the NFL. So he did very well for himself. And I think, certainly a guy that a lot of players in that locker room will root for him. And we saw Josh Metellus' messages today, and I think pretty emotional one for Josh Metellus, as close as those two were. I mean, that's a real thing. That's not, I don't think that was a show. I think that's very much real that those two were that tight. So it is a change there, but yeah, it's one of those spots where if he was going to make that kind of money, I can't envision a scenario where the Vikings were going to do that. And if they liked Theo Jackson, which they have based on what he's done the last couple of preseasons and in training camp. And then when he gets on the field, like he does in Seattle and makes that play, it just didn't seem like Cam Bynum was going to be back here if he had that kind of a market. It would have taken him saying, I'm going to take a lot less to return. And, there's just no real reason for players to do that. When your window to make that kind of money is that short, you kind of have to maximize it, which he did.
Yeah, we saw that with Sam Darnold. It's like, would it have made sense for Sam to come back for 1 year, $25 million, and just see what next year it might look like if he does well? Like, sure, maybe, but it's his time to cash in. And with Cam, it was the exact same thing. And it seems like a smart move by the Vikings to say, we'll try to recreate that for $10 million less with Theo Jackson per year, as opposed to just pay Cam. And I think Ben touched on it, the energy, the passion that Cam brought. His locker was right next to Theo Jackson, so he's going to take, I'm sure, a lot of pride in seeing the kind of role that Theo eventually takes with the Vikings here. And Theo could be a guy who replaces Cam. He could be a guy that replaces Harrison Smith if Harrison does not return to this team. So they are still going to have a hole and maybe multiple holes in the secondary should Byron Murphy decide to go elsewhere. But I'd imagine they're pushing hard to keep him at this point. Cam, I think, is one that we all kind of saw the writing on the wall with. He did when the season ended on January 13th in Arizona against the Rams. He talked about how I haven't even planned my flight to the Philippines. I normally have this thing booked to get out of here, but I knew I wasn't under contract. I'm in no rush to leave here, because he knew this might happen. And they all knew this could happen, just because they were all free agents. And this was a front office that was going to be looking to really revamp things and put their stamp on things. And so, I think with Cam leaving, it was one of those expected deals that is probably going to be the headliner among defenders leaving. I imagine he'll be the highest paid. Unless it's Byron Murphy. Sorry.
Yeah. What were each of your favorite Bynum celebrations from this past season? Mine was High School Musical.
I would go High School Musical. That one or the Parent Trap one, because my daughters have watched both of those movies, and my whole family was in London. So the day after that game, I think maybe it was the night of the game. I was working on my story for the next day in the paper, and my daughters were in our hotel room working on the Parent Trap handshake, which I think they knew, but that became like a thing. And my daughters, a lot of weeks I get home from a game, and my daughters are not typically like huge football fans, but they would typically ask, did Cam Bynum do a dance today? Like, what did he do now? And so, it usually had to be something from a turnover, and which usually was a sign the Vikings won, which most of those were in those types of games. But yeah, I would say I would probably put Parent Trap number one, just because I was with them when that happened in London, and kind of a fun memory watching them work on that handshake after that game.
I'm gonna go with the White Chicks one, because didn't that involve like a flip? Like somebody had to flip. I mean, that was incredible, and I think it was somebody
did NFL honors too. I think, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was Harrison Smith said afterward of like, I didn't know what the heck they were doing, and then I went and watched it, and I'm like, hey, they nailed it. Whatever that was, they nailed it. And then Harrison also mentioned the Parent Trap one because his cousin was Meredith Blake in that movie.
Right.
And so he said, like, I saw them practicing it in our makeshift, hotel meeting room or whatever in London. He goes, no one else knew what they were doing, but I knew because I knew that dance so well from that movie because his cousin was in it. That was incredible. So I would go with the White Chicks one, but there's a lot to choose from.
We'll see if Josh Metellus picks a new partner for these celebrations.
Hang on. Gen Z Disney Channel member of the beat. Which one was your favorite?
I said High School Musical.
Okay. I thought you were saying that was mine. You're not taking high school. You're not taking Camp Rock over High School Musical.
No, because the Camp Rock one still took me a minute. The High School Musical one, it was like the second they started doing that,
I almost
I like screamed in the press box. And yes, that was definitely my favorite one. And I'm glad I was there. I'm glad it had been saved for when I arrived on the Vikings beat, and
we may still not have spotted it if you weren't there to tell us all. I mean, and
none of you knew.
Well, and like I should, I suppose, because like my kids have watched that movie, but I didn't pick it out. I mean, when you said it right away, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But we may still have been asking for a while what it was. So, thank goodness you were there, Emily.
We'll see if Metellus picks a new partner. He does have a new option, as the Vikings did add a cornerback, Isaiah Rodgers, who's coming from the Eagles. That's a two-year contract, $15 million. Ben, I guess, what do you think about this addition? Obviously, as Andrew's mentioned a couple times on the pod, we're still kind of waiting for that Byron Murphy contract, whether he returns or not. But the cornerback room has been one we've really been talking about this offseason, and one of those big positions of need. So what does Rodgers bring here? Isaiah Rodgers, not Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
To this mix.
I think it makes some sense because they need depth at that position. I mean, that was not a spot where you can just sign one guy and then kind of feel good about it and there's nothing else you need to do. So, he's a guy I think that has made some plays on the ball in the past. He's been a returner. I think speed is something that people have prized with him. I think I haven't looked at the combine numbers exactly what they were, but I think a guy that can move, which they need. Having corners that can run was an issue at times last year. So an interesting thing with him was he was suspended the 2023 season for I think betting on NFL games, I think, and ends up violating the gambling policy and ends up missing that whole year, and then plays with the Eagles last year and I think started 3 or 4 games and obviously gets a ring, but he's had years where he's made quite a few plays on the ball. So I think it makes sense as depth. He'll probably be a little more than depth if you're paying him that much, but they needed to do a few things there. I mean, it's him, Mekhi Blackman, but they're going to have to keep adding at that position. I'm sure trying to get Byron Murphy back here is high on the list, but there's, we've said it, the infinite wisdom of Mike Zimmer on the cornerback thing is always true. That the right number is usually, well, I shouldn't say usually. The right number is pretty much always just one more. And certainly went for them last year. The way they approached it in training camp, they certainly thought that was the case.
Yeah, I thought this was a classic kind of budgetary move that they're banking on the guy outperforming the contract and not
Byron Murphy.
Yeah, not paying market value and just hoping he lives up to it. This is a guy who hasn't played over 50% of his snaps and defensive snaps in any season for any team. He's only, as Ben said, he's only been on the field for 4 seasons to this point, because one of them he was suspended the entire year for betting. And I'd read a report from ESPN about that suspension, and he bet on his own team. He bet a lot. He bet frequently. Hopefully this is something that he learned from, because it seemed like that 1-year suspension was at least how the league, they treat those things with such gravity, because integrity of the league is what they care about, not necessarily the other things. But it seemed like it was warranted given the amount of frequency with which he was betting. But he came back last year for the Eagles, was a part-time player. He appeared at, I think, 13 games on defense for them, and only played the 5th most cornerback reps on that team. He was even behind a guy like Avonte Maddox, behind the Kenyon Marshalls, Cooper DeJeans, Darius Slays. They had guys, and he was just kind of this part-time player who came in. He had 3, as Ben mentioned, I think he had 3 spot starts, ended up kind of playing up and down at that level. But clearly this is somebody, because I don't think any of us think that they're going to sign a defender right away in free agency. And this isn't somebody that Brian Flores wants. Yeah. So this must have been somebody that Brian Flores looked at and said, hey, I can work with this guy, go out, bring him in. We'll have him perform over what we're going to end up paying him. Because $7.5 million a year is like, it's what, 40% of what Charvarius Ward got, who got $20 million a year. There's another corner who got, I think JC Horn with the Panthers
got a lot, like
set the market
a year.
Yeah, $25 million a year for him. Somebody else got 22, and I was like, holy cow. I'm trying to remember who it was, but corners are going a lot. And so if and when Byron Murphy signs, I fully expect that to be over 20. And the Vikings will find a way to make it work if it's in Minnesota, but these corners are going for such a high rate that this Isaiah Rodgers deal could look like a good deal if this kid is a serviceable starter.
The thing with him, I mean, just looking at him a little bit, I mean, he's not a big corner, and they have wanted physical corners. He's only like, pushing 5'10". It's like $170. So, and he can fly. Just looking it up, he ran a 4.26 40 at his pro day, so he can move. And I would expect they'll probably work him into special teams in that capacity as well. But yeah, not the kind of corner that we've seen Brian Flores bring in very often. And so how they use him in a press role, and maybe they are thinking if they lose Byron Murphy, they need another nickel, and maybe he plays some of that with the size that he has, or kind of lack thereof. But yeah, it's an interesting fit from that perspective as well.
Couple other moves that we had throughout the days, both departures and signees. Outside linebacker, edge rusher Pat Jones is headed to the Panthers. Tight end Johnny Munt, we did mention this already, but he's headed to the Jags as well. So that purge of Kevin O'Connell's locker room may be coordinated by Grant Udinski, or maybe just coincidence, is continuing on. Punter Ryan Wright is returning on a 1-year deal. And then they signed safety Bubba Bolden as well, who was not with the team last year, has not played game snaps, but adds depth in that secondary. Any of those moves, any notes or kind of reactions that you had, Andrew, to seeing some of those?
You got any Johnny Munt thoughts?
Yeah, Johnny Munt taking off. I don't know what they're going to do without him. I think they'll be all right with TJ Hawkinson and Josh Oliver. What did Wes Phillips call Johnny Munt? The Bear Killer?
Yeah, something like that.
I think he called him the Bear Killer because when he was with the Rams, he had like one good game against the Bears. And we went and looked it up. What was this legendary Bears game? And it was like 3 catches for 40 yards or something like that. We're like, all right, I guess he's the Bear Killer. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, in knowing that, they still let him go. I mean, you're going to have to play the Bears twice a year and still let him go. So it's a gamble.
He's we're dogging on Johnny Munt too much.
And his
but I
barbecue. They don't have the tight ends are going to lose the barbecue competition now. None of
That's
them
true.
wanted to cook.
That's true. I think Kevin O'Connell called Johnny Munt the best number 3 tight end in the league, which
He did.
You got to imagine if you're a tight end, you want a little more from your coach. Like, come on, coach. Like, I'm a good number 2, maybe. Like, the best number 3. What
damning
is
with faint praise.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, him going to Jacksonville with Nick Mullins, who I guess wasn't too much of a shocker. I think as much as the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell praised Nick Mullins, they seem to do everything possible to keep him from seeing the field ever again after the 2023 season. Yep. So yeah, that wasn't too much of a shocker. But no, in terms of the Vikings moves, I think Pat Jones getting $10 million a year from the Panthers is a good deal for him. Mm-hmm. People kind of wanted to rag on him and say, "Oh, it's just another DJ Wanham." I thought he played fairly well when healthy last year. The memory that sticks in my head is him attacking Trent Williams in that week 2 win, spinning him around and attacking Brock Purdy, and just the physical strength he had was so much better than DJ Wanham or rotational guys that they've had before. So it sets up Dallas Turner for what we all expect, for him to take a big step forward here in year 2. So that to me was an interesting deal as well.
Yeah, Jones was somebody that, I mean, you just look at the depth they have at that position with Grenard, Van Ginkel, and Turner, that they weren't going to re-sign at that price, but it's a nice deal for him. I mean, he really, I think, earned it in a lot of ways, because he was a guy that had struggled to be productive. I think, kind of went through the position, drafted as a 4-3 defensive end, had to become a 3-4 outside linebacker, but got off, I think, had 4 sacks or 5 sacks in the first 4 games or something like that at the beginning of the year, and then really kind of production-wise tailed off. But we saw moments of that in that stretch with Trent Williams, and I think had a big game against Houston as well, where he could, be a big piece of a rotation, and certainly the Panthers are going to be expecting him to do that for them. But yeah, it's a nice deal for him, and I think a credit to a lot of the improvement we saw from him in 2024 in Minnesota.
Yeah, and this fell together as a nice story. And as a journalist, I'm always skeptical when players say this, but he did say at the end of the year that he had those 7 sacks in the first 10 games.
Yeah.
It was already setting a career high for him. And he said in that 10th game, he took a hit against the Titans in which he sprained his MCL and his PCL. He ended up playing through it. He missed a game a few weeks later against the Falcons. And then if we all remember, that game against the Packers at the end of the year is when Tucker Kraft went low, hit him in that exact knee, which ended his season. And he said afterward, he said, "I wish he would have hit the other knee, because I would have been able to keep playing and come back." And that's just an insane, brutal thing to say. But that's the mindset that these guys have. So to him, in his mind and how he's telling it, he was healthy when he was producing, became unhealthy middle of the year. And as Ben said, he tailed off in the back half of the year. But if they can get a full year of healthy Pat Jones, he could be a guy that around the league, people are saying like, "Oh, that was a decent signing for them." That's
a good point. I mean, that it is a good reminder that, and we always talk about this at the end of a season, if a guy tails off, the first question you probably should be asking is, okay, where is he hurt? Because guys, this happens enough that everybody's playing through something by that point of the year. It's generally a good assumption to say there's probably an injury involved here. This guy didn't all of a sudden just start to not be effective for no reason.
Those are all the Vikings moves. The one non-Viking move that I was going to mention, just because he's someone we've talked about, is former Eagles defensive tackle Milton Williams is off the table. He is going to sign with the Patriots on a 4-year, $104 million deal. So that's $26 million per season, which I think is around where we had estimated he might go last week, talking about how it would be a pricey acquisition for the Vikings. So they're still in the hunt for a defensive tackle. We know they talked to some at the combine, but we'll see with free agency. Is there anyone else that we think they could have in mind there?
We should mention they're hosting Jonathan Allen today at TCO Performance Center. And then our old friend, Dalvin Tomlinson, is reportedly going to get released by the Cleveland Browns, according to Adam Schefter. So Dalvin Tomlinson, somebody we knew they liked a few years ago when he left for a massive deal. He's 31 now, obviously older. Jonathan Allen's also 30 years old, but they could bring in some of these, stopgap kind of players all at the same time. That we should mention that Jerry Tillery and Jonathan Bullard are currently free agents as well.
Well, we will continue to be tied to our phones for certainly the next 24 hours, more like the next 6 days, probably. So Ben gets the night shift here coming up after we hop off this recording. So we'll have more news in the coming minutes to hours to days, however long it takes for the Vikings to work out all their free agency needs. Thank you everyone for listening and or watching this episode of the podcast. And please check out our work on thestartribune.com as well. We have a free agency tracker running there so that you can keep track and tabs on things as they go instead of waiting to listen to us in this form. But we will talk to you again soon.
Old man takes the night shift. This is how much I love you people.